this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to my beloved daughter.
The decree was only a few pages long, but the signature at its base carried the force of a royal earthquake. King Charles had made his decision in private, without ceremony, and with consequences that would reach far beyond a collection of jewels. Catherine had been named the sole heir to the Queen Mother's vault, and inside the palace, one question immediately overshadowed every other, who had just been deliberately shut out. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone after the final briefing, the clause beneath his hand. He read it again. One stroke of ink would redraw the balance of the House of Windsor. A royal decree, a formal order issued under the monarch's authority, would name Catherine, Princess of Wales, as sole heir to the Queen Mother's private vault. It covered jewels, ceremonial pieces, correspondence, and family treasures marked for protected succession. His pen hovered. Then the king signed. The vault held more than wealth. It held the memory of a woman whose influence had shaped royal confidence through war, scandal, and succession, making control of its contents a symbol of continuity and legitimacy. Charles knew its heir would guard not only objects, but the emotional record of the monarchy. That was why his pause mattered. He was not doubting Catherine. He was accepting the pain his choice would cause. Catherine received the sealed letter in a sitting room, with William watching her expression change. She read the sentence twice, then lowered the page without smiling. The princess felt no triumph, only the burden of guarding a legacy others believed should belong to them. William asked whether she was all right. She answered that nothing inside that vault could remain merely personal now. The decree excluded other senior royals from an automatic claim, including Camilla. As queen, she had expected ceremonial influence over the collection, and courtiers had prepared for that outcome. Instead, a sealed copy moved through a private corridor instead of normal household channels. The secrecy signaled resistance. Charles expected the decision to wound and divide before anyone was ready to explain it. William examined the attached file after Catherine set it down. One handwritten notation stopped him. Promise to be honored when the right guardian emerges. He looked toward her, realizing the signature had not begun this story. It had completed a vow made years before. But before anyone could understand why Charles had placed the entire legacy in Catherine's hands, they had to confront what the vault meant to each person now standing on opposite sides of his signature. To the public, the decree appeared to be a decision about inheritance. Inside the family, it felt far more personal. Catherine saw a duty she had never requested. Camilla saw a boundary drawn around a history she could never fully enter. Charles saw the weight of his mother and grandmother pressing against the future. And William understood that one locked vault had suddenly exposed every unspoken fracture within the royal household. Catherine sat beside William long after the sealed letter had been opened. She admitted that the inheritance felt less like a gift and more like a test designed to measure every choice she made from that moment forward. The Queen Mother's private legacy mattered because it carried the memory of a woman whose strength had helped steady the monarchy through war, scandal, and national uncertainty. Protecting those treasures meant protecting the emotional history behind them. Yet the princess feared the public would see ambition where she felt only duty. William listened carefully, then warned that even silence could now be twisted into triumph. Camilla received the formal summary from a senior aide in her private office. A royal summary was the official written explanation of a monarch's decision, prepared so each household understood exactly what had changed. She read the phrase, sole heir, twice, removed her glasses, and asked whether Charles had personally approved those exact words. The aide confirmed that he had. The Queen said nothing for several seconds, but the humiliation was unmistakable. She held the highest female title in the kingdom, yet she had been denied authority over one of the family's most meaningful collections. Charles felt the conflict more sharply than anyone. As a husband, he knew the decree would wound Camilla. As sovereign, he believed dividing the vault would weaken the clear line of succession and invite years of rivalry over access, loans, and ownership. The king had chosen certainty, but certainty came with suffering. He understood that every piece handed to Catherine would be interpreted as another door, closing against his wife. William feared the decision would force the two women into direct conflict when the monarchy most needed outward unity. He told Catherine that accepting the duty might place her against Camilla, even if neither woman openly declared war. The future king also sensed that Charles had not acted only because of recent tension. Something older was guiding him. Catherine opened an inventory ledger attached to the decree and found a handwritten instruction beside several protected pieces. An inventory ledger was the official record identifying royal objects, their ownership, and the conditions governing their use. The note stated that the collection must pass to a future woman capable of carrying duty without demanding ownership. She read the words aloud. William immediately understood that someone had been watching, judging, and waiting for years. That strange instruction had remained untouched for years, until one ceremony, one private exchange, and one unmistakable act of defiance forced Charles to decide who truly fulfilled it. The decree did not begin with lawyers, inheritance schedules, or sealed royal files. It began at a private anniversary ceremony at Clarence House, where one jewel from the Queen Mother's collection was brought out for the first time in years. What happened during the minutes that followed seemed small to those who witnessed it. Yet Charles would later look back on that evening as the moment the future of the entire vault was decided. Charles had arranged the gathering to honor his grandmother's wartime service, inviting only senior members of the family, trusted courtiers, and a small group of historians. Clarence House, the royal residence long associated with the Queen Mother, carried emotional weight because her memory remained tied to its rooms and traditions. At the center of the ceremony rested a sapphire and diamond brooch, chosen for temporary display. A ceremonial piece is an object worn during significant royal occasions to express duty, history, or national continuity, rather than personal wealth. Beside the brooch lay a handwritten note, describing it as a symbol of service, never rank. Camilla studied the piece closely, then quietly instructed an aide to prepare it for an upcoming state banquet. The Queen believed wearing it would honor the woman who had once owned it, but Charles had already ordered that nothing from the collection should leave the display until its future ownership had been settled. Catherine heard the instruction and felt the danger immediately. She approached the aide and calmly asked that the brooch remain untouched until the king's permission had been confirmed. Her words were respectful, but their meaning cut deeply. Camilla had been contradicted in front of courtiers, and the Queen's expression hardened as she realized Catherine had placed Charles's order above her authority. The princess understood at once that her intervention would not be forgotten. Later that evening, Charles confronted Camilla in the private library. She argued that wearing the brooch as queen would preserve its history and connect the past to the present. The king replied that taking possession before receiving permission violated the message attached to it. Service, he told her, could not begin with entitlement. Camilla accused him of allowing Catherine to judge her in front of the household. Charles answered that the princess had defended an instruction, not challenged a title. Catherine returned to the display room alone after the guests had left. She asked for the brooch to be secured, but refused to place her name on the custody record, the official document showing who requested or handled a protected royal object. Charles learned of that choice through the written account filed by the security officer. The next morning, he retrieved the Queen Mother's original instruction and circled one sentence: "The legacy must belong to the woman who protected it without trying to possess it." Once Charles recognized the difference between reaching for the legacy and protecting it, the legacy family disagreement could no longer remain hidden, and the confrontation everyone feared became unavoidable. There were no aides in the room, no private secretaries to soften the language, and no carefully prepared statements to protect anyone from the truth. Charles had summoned Catherine and Camilla because the decree could not move forward beneath a cloud of silent resentment. Yet the moment the door closed, the discussion stopped being about jewels. It became a reckoning over belonging, loyalty, and who had earned the right to carry royal memory forward. Charles stood beside the table in his private morning room and placed the unsigned decree between them. A custodian was the person given legal and practical control of a protected collection, while an heir would eventually inherit that responsibility outright. The king explained that naming two women would create competing households, uncertain ownership, and future battles over who could lend, wear, or remove each piece. One guardian meant one clear line of authority. Anything less, he warned, would turn the Queen Mother's legacy into a permanent royal dispute. Camilla looked past him and turned directly toward Catherine. She asked whether the princess had requested the inheritance or discussed it with William before the ceremony. Catherine felt fear rise beneath her calm expression, but she answered without hesitation. She had not known the document existed. She would not, however, apologize for stopping an object from being moved against Charles's command. The Queen replied that accepting the vault would place her above the reigning monarch in the public imagination, whatever the legal wording claimed. Catherine held her voice steady. She said protecting a wish was not the same as seeking a throne. Charles confirmed that the decree would contain two words Camilla had feared from the beginning: sole heir. Her restraint finally broke. She pushed her chair backward and accused her husband of turning one disagreement into a private judgment on her worthiness. The Queen demanded to know whether years of service beside him meant less than one act of caution. From Catherine, the king answered that title had never been the deciding test. Conduct had. Charles cited the anniversary ceremony and the written security account showing that Catherine secured the brooch without placing her name on the custody record. She had protected the collection while refusing credit, and that distinction mattered, because guardianship required restraint when possession was easiest. Camilla heard the verdict beneath his explanation. Catherine had passed a test she had not known was taking place, while the Queen had been judged for believing her title already gave her the answer. Camilla moved toward the door, then stopped. She told Charles that signatures could settle ownership, but they could never erase humiliation. The Queen left without looking back. Catherine remained, shaken by the pain now attached to her inheritance. Then the king admitted he had not signed the decree. One final power struggle still stood in its path. The confrontation exposed the wounds, but it did not determine the outcome, because beyond the family's emotions stood a quieter force, capable of shaping whether Charles's decree would survive at all. Royal power does not always announce itself from a throne. Sometimes it sits behind a closed office door, surrounded by inventories, old letters, legal seals, and documents no member of the family has read in full. As Charles prepared to finalize the decree, the struggle moved away from emotional confrontation and into the hands of those who controlled the records. One overlooked clause could either secure Catherine's Beau's inheritance or destroy it before the ink dried. Sir Jonathan Vale felt the danger before anyone spoke his name. As keeper of the royal archives, he controlled access to the private inventories, authenticated letters, and ownership instructions connected to the Queen Mother's collection. The royal archives were the protected records preserving the monarchy's official and private history, while authentication meant proving that a document was original and legally reliable. Vale knew one error could create a dispute between royal households and turn a private inheritance into a public crisis. The vault itself made everything harder. Some pieces were personal property, others were historic loans, family trust assets, or treasures governed by handwritten wishes. A family trust was a legal arrangement protecting property for future generations instead of claims, allowing one person to control it freely. That mixture mattered because Catherine could not inherit every object under one simple rule, and Camilla could still argue for ceremonial use, even without ownership. Vale entered the archive alone and opened a faded envelope carrying the Queen Mother's seal. His hands tightened as he read the contents. The letter placed him directly between Charles and Camilla because it did not support compromise. It demanded one guardian, one line of authority, and one undivided collection. Charles met the archivist without advisors present. The king remained silent, while Vale explained that an old memorandum gave the sovereign power to appoint a single female guardian. A memorandum was a written record of an instruction or agreement intended to guide later decisions. The monarch asked whether the clause could survive a household challenge. Vale answered that it could, if the original wishes were honored exactly. Then the archivist produced another document. A competing household memo had already been prepared, arguing that the reigning queen should receive automatic ceremonial access. Its careful wording revealed that someone had begun building a challenge before the decree was signed. Charles understood the threat immediately. Divided access would slowly become divided control. Vale finally placed the decisive note before him. It valued character, restraint, and service above marital rank. Charles read it twice, and recognized Catherine in every line. The king ordered the decree strengthened, so that access, loans, and future inheritance would remain under her sole authority. Vale sealed the revision, knowing its secrecy would make the consequences even more brutal. By the time the strengthened decree left the archives, the battle over its meaning had already fought. But the people about to lose access had not yet been told. The decree became real, not when Charles signed it, but when a small gold key changed hands. Until that moment, the arguments could still be dismissed as private tension and unfinished paperwork. Then a royal security officer entered Camilla's household office, carrying a sealed authorization. No accusations were spoken. No dramatic announcement was needed. The moment he requested the vault key, everyone in the room understood that the old balance of power had ended. Camilla held the key in her open palm while the officer waited. The sealed authorization suspended every existing access permission, froze the full inventory, and ordered all temporary keys returned before Catherine's custodianship began. Custodianship meant the legal responsibility to control, protect, and approve the use of a collection without treating it as personal property. The order mattered because access had always carried influence. Whoever controlled the keys could decide which memories appeared at royal events and which remained locked away. The Queen asked whether Charles knew the removal was happening that morning. The officer answered that the authorization carried the king's signature and had been issued directly through royal security. Camilla closed her fingers around the key. She did not shout. She did not challenge the order in front of her aides. Instead, she placed it on the desk with deliberate care, refusing to let anyone witness how deeply the moment had wounded her. The silence made the humiliation sharper. The consequences spread immediately. Every planned loan from the Queen Mother's collection was halted, including pieces selected for state banquets and remembrance ceremonies. A state event was an official royal occasion, connected to government, diplomacy, or national service, where historic objects could carry political meaning. Catherine would now have to review each request and decide whether its purpose honored the collection's history. That authority placed her above existing household plans and ensured Camilla would need permission where she had once expected automatic access. Catherine learned the transfer had begun while preparing for an engagement with William, nearby. She stopped fastening her coat and admitted that she had never wanted Camilla stripped of a key before her own staff. The princess feared the decree was becoming an act of public punishment rather than private protection. William understood her pain, but he warned that silence would now be read in two dangerous ways. Some would call it guilt, others would call it victory. Then another threat emerged. A private copy of the decree had reached a courtier loyal to Camilla, and the wording could be leaked to suggest Catherine had engineered the exclusion herself. William urged her not to react before they understood who had passed it on. Before she could answer, a message arrived from Windsor. Charles wanted to meet her alone, without advisors, documents, or protocol. The machinery of the palace had carried out Charles's command, but only a private conversation between the king and the woman he had chosen could reveal whether the decision would unite the future or poison it. For the first time since the decree was signed, there were no files between them. Charles stood beside a cold fireplace at Windsor, while Catherine waited for an explanation she had been too disciplined to demand. The king had given her control of a legacy older than her place in the family, yet he had never told her why. When he finally spoke, his words transformed the inheritance from a royal victory into an intimate burden. Charles had dismissed every aide, lawyer, and family advisor before she entered. Nothing remained to soften the truth or hide it behind palace language. The king told Catherine he had chosen her because she treated royal history as something borrowed from the future, never owned by the present. That difference mattered, because the collection would outlive every person now fighting over it. Whoever controlled the vault could either preserve its meaning for future generations, or reduce it to proof of personal status. Catherine listened without interrupting, then admitted what she had been carrying since the key changed hands. She feared the decree would permanently damage her relationship with Camilla, and make the public believe she had been rewarded for displacing another woman. The princess had accepted criticism before, but this was different. Every jewel she protected could now be presented as evidence of ambition. Every act of restraint could be dismissed as carefully managed triumph. Charles lowered his voice and confessed his own sadness. Protecting the Queen Mother's wishes had forced him to wound his wife, expose Catherine to suspicion, and divide two royal households already under pressure. The monarch did not pretend the decision was painless. He said duty sometimes demanded a choice that left no one untouched, including the person making it. Then Charles explained the promise hidden behind the handwritten notation. Years earlier, during a private recorded conversation about succession, Queen Elizabeth had asked him to keep the Queen Mother's personal legacy intact beneath one trusted guardian. Succession meant the planned transfer of royal duty, authority, and responsibility from one generation to the next. The late queen feared that dividing the collection would divide its story. He had promised her it would remain whole. Catherine finally answered with a condition of her own. She would accept the inheritance only if the collection served the monarchy through carefully chosen exhibitions, historical education, and guidance for future heirs. It would never become her private treasure or a weapon against Camilla. The princess wanted guardianship, not possession. Charles took her hand and told her that this condition was precisely why he had chosen her. In that moment, reluctance became resolve. Catherine no longer saw the vault as a reward she needed to defend, but as a duty she had to deserve every day. With Catherine finally accepting the duty on her own terms, the palace could no longer contain the decree, and when the news reached the public, one image would define the entire controversy. By sunrise, the secret decree belonged to the world. Broadcasters abandoned their scheduled coverage, commentators argued over the meaning of sole heir, and palace gates became the center of a debate about duty, favoritism, and the future queen. Yet the public reaction crystallized around one unforgettable moment. A newspaper held above a crowd outside Buckingham Palace, its front page turning a private family decision into a national judgment. The London Herald carried a formal photograph of Catherine beneath 4 words printed across its front page, "The keeper of her legacy." A smaller headline asked why Camilla had been excluded, turning the inheritance into a contest between 2 women before either had spoken publicly. Outside Buckingham Palace, the sovereign's official London residence, and the symbolic center of the monarchy, a woman lifted the paper above the gathering crowd. She declared that the vault had been given to the next chapter of the crown. Cheers erupted, but angry objections quickly followed. Some saw continuity, others saw cruelty. Broadcasters deepened the division. One morning presenter called the decree Charles' clearest endorsement of Catherine, and proof that he trusted her to guard the monarchy's future. Another described it as a public rebuke of Camilla, and a painful reminder that becoming queen had not guaranteed full acceptance into the family's private history. The king heard both interpretations through a recorded media briefing. He remained silent, knowing any attempt to defend one woman could deepen the wound carried by the other. Catherine watched the coverage on a silent television before an engagement. Her stomach tightened as her private responsibility became a weapon in a national argument. The princess had accepted the vault to protect history, yet strangers now treated it as proof that she had defeated Camilla. Success had arrived wearing the face of suffering, and she understood that her first decision would define every choice that followed. Camilla heard a radio discussion from an adjoining room and asked an aide to switch it off. Seconds later, the queen changed her mind. She listened as callers debated whether a royal title could ever guarantee emotional acceptance. The words struck deeply because they reduced years of duty to one locked door. Still, she remained composed, even as the public questioned whether she truly belonged. The palace finally issued a formal response. The collection would remain undivided beneath Catherine's guardianship, but selected pieces could be loaned for royal service with her approval. A royal loan allowed a historic object to be used temporarily without changing its ownership. Catherine immediately authorized the Queen Mother's brooch for Camilla to wear at a remembrance event. She surrendered no authority, yet she refused to turn authority into revenge. That gesture did not undo the pain, but it changed the meaning of the inheritance. And the final judgment would be delivered not by headlines or courtiers, but by how Catherine and Charles chose to live with what had been decided. In the end, no jewel could explain what Charles had truly handed to Catherine. The diamonds, letters, brooches, and ceremonial treasures were only the visible part of the inheritance. The real legacy was trust, the dangerous, isolating trust placed in someone expected to protect the past without becoming possessed by it. After weeks of anger and humiliation, the family finally reached a moment that revealed whether the decree had divided them forever or forced them to understand duty differently. Camilla arrived at the remembrance service wearing the Queen Mother's brooch Catherine had authorized. A remembrance service was a formal ceremony honoring sacrifice, duty, and those whose lives had shaped the nation. By wearing the piece, the Queen publicly accepted Catherine's posed authority over the collection without surrendering her own place in royal service. The gesture mattered because it showed that access could still carry dignity, even after ownership had been denied. Catherine greeted Camilla privately before the ceremony began. She did not offer an apology she could not honestly give, because neither woman could undo Charles's decree. Instead, the princess promised that every future loan would be guided by history, purpose, and duty, never personal revenge. The queen listened, then admitted that losing automatic control had felt like being told she would always remain outside part of the family. Yet she also accepted that Catherine had not created the decision and had chosen generosity, when exclusion would have been easier. Charles watched the two women enter separately, but without hostility. Relief crossed the king's face, though it carried the weight of regret. His decree had solved a succession problem by exposing truths no title could hide. The monarch had protected his grandmother's wishes, but he had also forced his wife and daughter-in-law to confront what belonging truly meant. The consequences were now permanent. Catherine remained the sole legal heir and guardian of the undivided vault. Camilla held no ownership claim, though she could receive approved loans for suitable royal duties. The decision was not a declaration that one woman mattered while another did not. It was a judgment that inherited history belonged with the person most willing to protect it, without using it as proof of status. Catherine completed the first full inventory alone. She locked the vault, placed the key inside a plain case, and left carrying no jewel. That final choice revealed everything. Guardianship meant resisting possession. The decree strengthened the monarchy because it defined succession through responsibility, preserved the Queen Mother's legacy as one complete story, and allowed dignity to survive even after privilege had been denied. The king's signature gave Catherine the vault, but her restraint proved why she deserved it. And in that final distinction, the monarchy found both its verdict and its peace. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.